friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jamie and today we are reviewing Last to Leave the Room by Caitlin Starling. Last to Leave the Room by Caitlin Starling. This is the newest release from the author of The Death of Jane Lawrence, which I did read last year. This book releases October 10th, 2023, but I was able to read an arc graciously provided by Netgalley, Putnam Books, and Macmillan Audio. Thank you so much for providing me this arc in exchange for an honest review. Okay, jumping into a brief overview of what this is. Last to Leave the Room follows our protagonist Tamsin, who is a research scientist leading the team trying to figure out what is going on with a very unusual happening going on in the city, and more specifically in Tamsin's own basement. A mysterious door has suddenly appeared in Tamsin's basement. She can't open it, she doesn't know where it leads, and she has absolutely no idea why it's there. Things take an even more unsettling turn when one day the door opens and out walks an exact copy of her, a doppelganger. Tamsin has to figure out not only what the heck is going on, but also whether or not she can trust the doppelganger. So similar to how in The Death of Jane Lawrence, Caitlin Starling was pulling on very popular tropes of the Gothic genre, specifically the Gothic haunted house / the kind of Rebecca story, which is a very popular book in this canon. Last to Leave the Room is pulling on a very popular trope in the science fiction canon. The doppelganger trope has been used a million different times in a million different ways, so this does seem fitting that this is something that Caitlin Starling wants to play with. Last to Leave the Room is a speculative science fiction story with some elements of thrillers, suspense, maybe even horror if you want to go that far, but it definitely hinges most on its science fiction trappings. I do say speculative science fiction though, because similar to Death of Jane Lawrence, though we have a character who is a scientist and likes to talk in a lot of scientific jargon, ultimately it feels more fantastical and maybe even supernatural than strictly science. The majority of the book and the focus of most of the plot is on the dynamic between Tamsin and her doppelganger, but in typical Caitlin Starling fashion, there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of things that are also going on in the background. I will say that the first chunk of this book is pretty dense, filled with a bunch of scientific jargon and people having meetings and even internal politics of the lab. But things definitely start picking up once the mystery is introduced, and from there I felt like the pacing was pretty strong because I always wanted to keep reading to learn the answers. I was very curious about what was going on. So the pacing was pretty good overall, but I do have to say that there were a couple times that Tamsin makes some choices that felt like they were not really based on what she would do as a character, but rather what the plot called for. Thinking about my overall enjoyment of Last to Leave the Room, I did like it, but the problem seems to be a similar situation I felt with Death of Jane Lawrence, was that for some reason there's just something about Caitlin Starling's writing that to me feels like it's missing an emotional or thematic center. I actually do like Caitlin Starling's writing style. It's just that I'm constantly left with this feeling of like, why are we talking about these subjects? Why are we doing this plot? It feels like her focus is consistently more on just plot rather than the underlying, core of that story. This was really evident to me in Last to Leave the Room, specifically because the doppelganger trope is done so often, and usually this trope is to deal with themes of humanity, personhood, identity, something to do with the character having to face themselves. This leads to so many discussions that could be had, anything from a very simple theme to much more complex ideas, and especially with the character of Tamsin being a very cold and calculating person. She tends to keep people at arm's length, including the reader. It's kind of hard to understand every choice that she's making and everything that's going through her mind, even though you literally are in her head the entire book. It just feels like she's not making choices out of like a sense of agency, but rather things are just happening to her. This book to me kind of falls into the trap of the like, and this happened, and this happened, and then this happened, rather than because of this choice, this thing happened. Because of this thing happened. It seemed to be really plot focused, which might work for some people, but for me, just left me a bit dissatisfied overall. Although I wouldn't say that this is a bad book, really, I just felt that it was missing a kind of emotional glue that held the whole thing together. I gave this book a 3.5 out of 5 stars, so not a bad book by any means, and certainly I felt that the intrigue of the plot was enough to keep me going, but I don't think that this is going to be something that sticks in my mind very strongly, and it's certainly not going to reach the heights of other doppelganger stories that are in the science fiction canon. If you're wondering whether or not you should pick up this book, I would say if you are someone who enjoys science fiction and, is okay with a little bit of the speculative or maybe more unusual elements of science fiction, and this plot sounds interesting to you, I would say go ahead, give it a try. I did enjoy my time with it. But if you feel like you are going to be bogged down or frustrated with the heavy science jargon, then I don't know if the reward is going to be worth all the time that you put in, especially early on in the book when you have to get through a ton of that stuff. There are not a ton of thriller or horror elements in here, so if you're picking up this book because you liked some of those elements in Death of Jane Lawrence, they are much fewer and farther between. If you liked Death of Jane Lawrence, the character voice is pretty similar, although they're in different time periods, so that there is a distinction there, but it's a scientist, female protagonist, so if you enjoyed that element of Death of Jane Lawrence, it's stronger in Last to Leave the Room. But if you didn't care for Death of Jane Lawrence, I'm not sure that Last to Leave the Room will sway you on Caitlin Starling, though I will say I preferred Last to Leave the Room over Death of Jane Lawrence, just because I felt that Last to Leave the Room had such an engaging plot that I wanted to keep moving along, whereas this one felt like it was moving a bit slow. And I do say more plot, or like a faster plot, but still, in terms of typical thrillers, if you are typically a thriller reader looking to pick this up, this is going to be a much slower burn than your usual thriller. Overall, while I did enjoy my time with this book, I'm not sure that Caitlin Starling is for me. There's something about her writing style that just does not click all the way with me. But that being said, 3.5 stars for Last to Leave the Room. There you go. Those are my thoughts on Last to Leave the Room. Let me know down in the comments below. Are you going to pick this up this season? And if you have already, please let me know down in the comments what your thoughts are. I would love to hear them. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, week, month, year, all of it. And I hope to see you back here next time for another recent release review. Thanks so much. Bye!